everybody, Charlie Stevens here. Thank you so much for joining me for another guitar lesson. So in today's video, I'd like to talk about triads. We're going to learn how to construct triads, what they are, and how we can build them. Okay? So a triad is just a fancy name for a chord. All the chords we've already learned on this channel, for instance, C. Well, when I say play a C chord, I'm implying a few things by just calling it C. I'm implying that it's a C major chord, otherwise I'd have to say play a C minor chord. I'm also implying that it's a triad, which is a type of chord that has 3 notes. There are also chords that have 4 notes, for instance G7 we learned. That actually has 4 different notes in it, G, B, D, and F. That's 4 different things. A triad only has 3, C, E, G, 3 notes, okay? So when somebody's just talking about regular chords, they're usually talking about triads. So they're not necessarily synonymous because there are chords that are not triads, but if somebody says, oh, play an A chord here, and they don't specify what type of A chord, they're likely talking about a triad. Okay, so it's called a triad because there's 3 notes in it. We do have a chord smaller than that called a dyad, which only 2 notes. But typically, that's not really what we think about when we call a chord, because there's another way to refer to a group of 2 notes, and we call that an interval. Specifically, the distance between the 2 notes is the interval. Okay? So I'm going to do another lesson on intervals at another time where we'll unpack all of those, and we'll see all the different types that exist and things like that. But I don't think that that's super important for understanding this lesson. But it is a tiny bit because we're going to use a certain type of interval in this lesson. The interval we're going to use is a third. Okay, so intervals get their names mostly from the major scale. Remember when we did the C major scale, we did learn the major scale formula. Please watch that video if you haven't seen it. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Okay, so we learned that pattern, and when we go 3 notes in the scale, that's called a major third because it's the 3rd note in the major scale. If we were playing a minor scale, the 3rd note is different actually. Okay, we get a different note there. That's called a minor third. So those are the 2 different types of thirds we have. Okay, and now the only other types of interval we've really dug into in this channel were half steps and whole steps. Okay, a half step is from one note to the very next note. Very next place in the musical alphabet. Please watch the lesson on musical alphabet if you need a refresher on that. But for instance, C to C sharp, that's a half step. And the reason they call it that is because it wouldn't look like it's on a different line. It would be C, and then C sharp would have a sharp sign in front of another note that looked the same in the same place of our musical stave. So we have to look at the music, the written music, and sort of have a consideration for how that works to kind of understand why some of these terms are the way they are. But we don't have to worry about that too much right now. But anyhow, we would have from C to C sharp, we wouldn't have really gone anywhere on the page, so they call that one a half step. From C to D, we would have moved. We'd be on one spacer line, and we'd be on the next spacer line, depending on which C and D we're talking about, on which staff we're talking about. Okay, so that's why they call that one a whole step. And that is 2 frets apart, or 2 keys on the piano, 2 spaces within our musical alphabet. Okay, so we've previously learned about whole steps and half steps. Now, once we start talking about distances that are bigger than that, we could say 7 half steps. You could say that, but a better way to say that is a perfect fifth. The interval of a perfect fifth happens to have 7 half steps, happens to be 7 half steps away. So we have this sort of shorthand that we use, intervals, and we can start giving labels to things without having to juggle so many half steps and whole steps in our head, okay? But it can only sort of be reduced to that. So another name for a half step is actually a minor second. Another name for a whole step by its intervallic name would be a major second. So a whole step from C is D. That's the 2nd note in the major scale. That's why we call it a major second. Okay? We could have just called that a whole step. We didn't really need the term major second before, right? We could just say a whole step. But now it's a little bit nice to have the minor third. So the minor third happens next. So if we were to go a whole step, we'd be at D. If we did a minor third, that means 3 half steps away. So that lands us here on E flat if I started on C. Okay, so a minor third, and we're going to represent that with a small lowercase m. Okay, that means minor third, and that's 3 half steps away. That's not the one that we have in our C major scale though. So if I go 3 half steps from C, 1 is C sharp, 2 is D, 3, D sharp or E flat. We have to call it E flat if we want it to be a third, because D sharp is something called an augmented second. Same exact note, but since it has a D name, every type of D is going to be a type of second, so therefore that would be an augmented second. You could have augmented and diminished intervals as well, which we will see a tiny bit in this lesson. Anyhow, that's what happens 3 half steps away. If we were to go 4 half steps away, we get to E. That's the third note in the major scale. That's why we call that one a major third. Okay? So that's represented by the big M. Big M equals major third, and a major third is 4 frets away, 4 half steps. Little m equals minor third, that's 3 half steps away. Okay? So when we create triads, we need to put 3 notes together. So the relationship between the first note and the next note are going to be some type of third. Could be a minor third, could be a major third. Then the relationship between the second note to the third note, we're going to have an intervallic distance between that. That could be a major third or a minor third as well. Okay, so basically the way I like to do this is have my different types of M, big M and little m, and I can factor them in different ways. And there's a pretty limited amount of ways that I can put them together. I can either do 2 big M's, a big M plus a big M, 4 frets away plus another 4 frets away. That gives me something called an augmented triad. I can do a big M and I can stack a little m on top of that. Okay, so 4 frets, then 3 frets. That gives me something called a major triad. So when we're playing all these chords, we learn C major. Really, that's what's happening. We're playing a starting note, we're going 4 frets away, then we're going 3 frets away from that. It might not look like that on the guitar because we actually have to play these on different strings. I wouldn't be able to play that all on one string at the same time. So it looks a little different, but really that's what we're doing. Okay? Now, that's it for when the major third is in the first slot. So now we have to put the minor third first. So we could put the minor third first. Then on top of that, we could put a major third. That equals a minor triad. All of the minor chords we've learned, that was going on behind the scenes of those. When we learned E minor, we had a minor third, then we had a major third, okay? Then there's only one last combination. Now I can put 2 little m's and stack those on top of each other, right? So I can do a minor third plus another minor third. That's going to give me something called a diminished triad. Okay? Diminished means smaller than, so it's smaller than a triad. Augmented means larger than, it's larger than a normal major or minor triad. And it's kind of interesting because the major and minor ones will always lead you in the same place. The outer notes will always be the same, but the diminished and augmented ones will have either an augmented or a diminished fifth between the root and the fifth, so between the first and the last note of the triad. Okay, so some of this stuff is a little bit hard to understand without understanding the intervals, and all of this will come in time. You have to kind of learn a little bit in this way, a little bit in a different way, and things will eventually start to click. So it might feel a little bit scattered and a little bit messy, and that's kind of normal. That's kind of the way that we have to learn about this thing. There's no perfect way to go about this. We just have to start increasing our understanding little steps at a time until the whole picture comes together for us, okay? But let's do a few of these. So we're going to take the note C as our starting point. We know we have one on the 3rd fret of our 5th string here. Okay, now the first combination is 2 little m's. So I'm going to go a little m, which is 3 frets away. I don't count this C because I'm already there. I'm counting the steps, right? So 1, 2, 3. That's an E flat note. C, E flat. Okay, from here I need to go another 3. 1, 2, 3. That's a G flat note. Okay, so I get... That's a symmetrical triad because they're both little m's. They're 3 frets, then another 3 frets. It's symmetrical, okay? Which makes it sound weird. Part of the beauty of the major and minor chords is almost like this yin-yang effect where we have big M and small m, or small m and big M. It's kind of like, you know, the yin-yang, the balance of it makes it sound beautiful. When we have 2 small m's, or 2 big m's for that matter, it... sounds more mathematical, and it sounds just sort of weirder, okay? And I'll play the examples of those and let you be the judge of that. But that's my opinion on it. Major and minor are by far more common, and something about the balanced nature of them is really cool. Also has to do with the 5th being stable or unstable, which we'll talk about in a minute. So I can't play all those on the same string, but I have C, E flat, G flat. Now I'm going to play those on different strings. So I'm going to play my C here on the 6th string. I have a C on the 8th fret. Now I'm going to play my E flat. This is the same place I played the E flat earlier, actually, 6th fret of the 5th string. And then this G flat, I'm going to get that on the 4th fret of D. So I know that G is the 5th fret of D, because we know that from tuning. Go back, that's G flat. So I get C, E flat, G flat. Quite a big stretch. And this is not necessarily a lesson on how to play these triads. I can do a video where we talk about all the different fingering possibilities for all these different types of triads, and we'll definitely do that, but that's more advanced. That's not really what we're trying to do right now. So if you want to copy my fingering and learn these, that's really great, but that's not really the point of it. This is more of a theoretical conversation. So don't worry too much if I'm going quick about this part. But anyhow, this is a diminished triad. We have a minor third, which is always looks like that on most of our strings, except for if we're talking about B to G. A minor third is going to be 1 string that way, 2 frets that way, and we get that again. Put those together, it's a stack of minor thirds, okay? C diminished triad. There's a lot of uses for the diminished triad, but it's a little bit exotic and weird. So we have to be sort of careful how we use it. So as we get more advanced, we'll talk about how we can incorporate it. But at this point of the channel that we're doing, if you're following along from a total beginner up to here, we shouldn't be too concerned with diminished because they're a little bit more of an advanced thing, in my opinion. Okay, so that's our diminished triad. Okay, so next one, we could take a minor third and stack that on top of a major third. Let's see what happens there. So C, we go 3 frets, 1, 2, 3, E flat again. Now I have to go 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'm on G, not G flat. Okay, so briefly I want to talk about the interval of the 5th. This is the power chord we learned. A perfect 5th we call it. So it's called a perfect 5th because it does not have a major or minor variety. That's one of the reasons. Also, the ratios between those notes are desirable ratios that are easy to conceptualize. So Pythagoras thought of them as being perfect intervals. That's another reason for the term. But practically, the difference between a perfect interval is that it doesn't have a major and a minor variety. It's the perfect interval, the perfect 5th. If I want to make it smaller, so if we wanted to make a major third smaller, we can make it a little bit smaller and we would get a different type of third, a minor third. With this, we don't get a minor 5th, we get a diminished 5th. That's why we called this chord a diminished triad. It has a minor third, but it has a diminished 5th in it. Okay, a tritone. Okay, so that's a little bit of an exotic sound. It's a less stable 5th because gives you some dissonance. The perfect 5th, which we talked about using in the power chords, that's a very stable tone that's very nice. Okay, so that's what we get in our minor triad. We get a perfect 5th. We go a minor third, and we get a E flat. So C to E flat, that's a minor third. E flat to G, that's a major third. The distance between C and G is a perfect 5th. One of the reasons why this sounds less mathy and weird than the other ones we've heard. Okay, so that's a minor triad, okay? This is C minor in this case. Now, we're going to do the next one. So now we have to put a major triad there, right? So if I go major, we've used all the minor ones. Now getting bigger here, we would go major next. Okay, so from C I have to go 4 frets because 4 frets is a major third, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the note E. Okay, from there I have to go 3. Now we're going to do a big M on top of a little m. So I have to go 3 from here. 1, 2, 3. Hey, I'm at G again. Same thing for major and minor. It's always a C and a G, but in between we either had the E flat, when it was a minor third away from the root, that created a major third away from here. So we had minor, major. If I go major first, and then minor, well, I end up at the same place. The outer notes are the same. And the middle note changes by 1 fret, right? That's why power chords can work for major or minor. Okay, that's why they're so powerful and why we call them power chords. They just give us both of those notes, not the third. It doesn't give us the note that tells us if the chord is major or minor, therefore it can be appropriate for either chord. That's why they're very versatile. They're a little bit ambiguous, okay? All right, so that's a major triad. We're going to start. We go a major third, which is this shape on the guitar, by the way. Just like we have in our G chord and our C chord, we can see where our root is, and then the next note is 1 fret on the next string, 1 fret that way. That's a major third, unless we're on the G and B string, and it's different there. But again, we'll talk about that when we talk about all the different types of intervals, all the ways we can find them on the guitar. But we do have patterns. Mostly it's the same shapes. We can memorize the intervals as shapes, and that's really helpful too. So we have that shape, then we have a minor third. We talked about how that's 2 frets away on the next string like that. Otherwise it's reversed. Minor third here, major third there. That's a minor triad. Major triad. C, E, G. Okay, great. Now the next type is augmented. So major plus another major. See, it's the same shape. Cool chord, very dreamlike. This is the most exotic of them all. This one is even more exotic than the diminished scale because it doesn't show up in our harmonized major scale. So we'll learn about how to harmonize the major scale, and we will see an instance of the diminished chord, but we will not see an instance of the augmented chord until we harmonize the melodic minor scale, and we'll actually find one in there. But anyhow, pretty exotic sound. It's another symmetrical one because it's 4 half steps and another 4 half steps, gives it an even number. And it changes our fifth again. Before we had the fifth here on G, which is a perfect fifth away from the root. Here we have a G sharp. So I'm going to do this part this time actually. Let's do it like this. So C, 1, 2, 3, 4 is E. Another 4 from here. 1, 2, 3, 4 is G sharp. Okay, so I didn't do that time, but that's the augmented chord, respelled to be on different strings, or refingered to be on different strings rather, so I can play all 3 of those notes at the same time. C, E, G sharp. Okay, so we had C to G, perfect fifth. C to G sharp is called an augmented fifth. Okay, so that's why this one's called an augmented triad. The distance is bigger. It takes up more space than either the major or the minor because the distance between the first note and the last note, the root and the fifth, are further apart. Okay? So that's basically it. That's how triads work. We have these 4 different varieties of triads, and the reasons that we get to them is because we have these 2 different types of thirds that we can stack. Okay, so now we know that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the terms of how we describe these 3 notes. So the first note, we call that one the root, okay? This is similar to the concept of a tonic. A tonic is the first note of a scale. The root is the first note of a chord. So it's sort of a microcosm of a scale. So a scale will have different chords in them. Each chord will have a root. Only one note will be the tonic though, because that's the one that the whole key is named after. So it's a similar concept, but boiled down to the individual chord we're talking about. So we call the first note the root, the next note we call the third, and the next note we call the fifth. Root, third, fifth. That's how triad is conceptualized. So if it's a major chord, it's the root, the major third, and the perfect fifth. If it's a minor chord, it's the root, the minor third, and the perfect fifth. If it's a diminished chord, it's the root, the minor third, and the diminished fifth. And if it's an augmented chord, it's the root, the major third, and the augmented fifth. Either way, it's 1, 3, 5, right? We might have 1 flat 3, 5, or 1 minor 3, 5. That means the same thing, by the way. If I take the third and I make it a minor third, I flat it by going a half step down. We call that the flat third. That's another thing about intervals as they relate to the major scale. Everything is assumed to be in the major scale, and if it's not, we talk about how it's not. The sharp 5, the flat 5, okay? So we have root, third, fifth. That's how we describe different triads. All right, well, that's kind of a lot to unpack. I hope that made sense to you. Don't worry too much if it didn't, because I'm going to make some more videos where we see some examples of this. We'll see how we can take a major scale and we can derive triads from it by skipping thirds and using only the notes that are in that scale, and we'll see what types of chords we can derive from it and how to harmonize the scale in our next video, okay? And I think that will hopefully help things click. And as we keep progressing in our course, we'll keep talking about triads, and you'll get more and more experience, and this will click more and more. So if this sounded a little bit foreign, hang in there, and it will become more clear in time, I hope. All right, but hopefully you understood that. Hopefully I explained that fairly well, and we have primed ourselves for deepening our understanding as we go. So thank you so much for tuning into this guitar lesson. If you're enjoying the course, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next video.